In today's episode of Shattered Legacies Deep Dive, we're going to be talking about one of the most important planets the Siritan Empire has. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about the Throne World or the Capital World. It should be noted that both are completely separate planets. The Throne World, otherwise sometimes known as the Crown World, is the planet that holds the Siritan royal family. That's their home world, whereas the Siritan capital world is obviously the capital of the Siritan Empire. However, we're talking about an entirely different planet rather than these two. Today's episode is all about the fortress world, Austungrad. Now, before we can get into what Austungrad is, as well as a little something extra known as the Emperors of Austungrad, we need to talk about the classification of the planet, specifically Fortress World. Fortress World is one of three planet designations that are commonly called defense-oriented planets within the Siritan Empire. When we covered the Siritan Royal Army, we had stated that depending on what planet you are on will depend on what the tithe or the tax is to the wider Siritan Empire. If you live on something like a glitter world, it's most likely going to be a monetary tax in the Siritan Empire's universal currency, simply just known as credits for simplicity. Compare that to something like an agricultural world. Their tithe or tax could be the crops that they grow or the livestock that they raise. Something like an industrial world could be responsible for commercial, industrial, and military goods. Furthermore, planets that are heavily militarized and focused on raising soldiers, their tithe may just straight up be soldiers themselves to feed the Siritan Royal Army. However, there's one planet classification that doesn't possess a tithe, and these are defense-oriented planets. There are three different types. There are barrier worlds, bastion worlds, and fortress worlds. Let's start off with barrier worlds. The Siritan Empire is constantly pushing out in every single direction, desperately trying to expand their overall territory, for the most part, no matter the cost. Oftentimes, planets that are on the very outer edge of Siritan territory will be temporarily raised up as a barrier world. They're designed to throw back any small engagements from enemy forces, but not really set up to handle large-scale battles. This is largely due to the fact that exploration, assault, and death fleets from the Siritan Empire will basically spare whatever supplies they have to the settlement to get it set up to the point where they can protect themselves until the territory is pushed outwards far enough where this planet isn't right on the border, and thus can usually at that point specialize in whatever it's going to be specializing in, whether that be agricultural or a forge world or eventually trying to work its way up to a standard glitter world. As a result, barrier worlds aren't particularly powerful. They, like I said, they can hold off small skirmishes such as pirate raids and stuff like that, but if an actual assault fleet from another faction comes and decides to poke around in this solar system, a barrier world isn't going to be able to stop it. It'll at the very least delay them just slightly long enough where there may be reinforcements coming in time to assist them, but even that's not really a guarantee as we're out on the very edges of Siritan territory. Beyond this, we have the Bastion world. Now, Bastion worlds are absolutely everywhere. When we talk about defense planets, it's almost always a Bastion world, unless otherwise stated. Bastion worlds are quite literally specialized and designed for defense. The layouts of the entire cities on the surface are specifically set up so that there are long corridors for snipers to set up kill boxes, plenty of areas to lay in wait for ambushes, and even possesses underground tunnels that allow soldiers to get to various different points in the city in a somewhat short amount of time, easily being capable of ambushing and flanking enemy forces. That being said, it's still not incredible. One advantage that Bastion worlds do have over barrier worlds, however, is the fact that they possess surface-to-orbital cannons as well as their own dedicated defense fleet. Now, when we're talking about a defense fleet, this is specifically a fleet that is big enough to take down, or at the very least postpone, an assault fleet. Now, I've been throwing out these two terms a fair amount so far. Assault and death fleets. What are they? Well, when it comes to the Surgeon Empire, because they have access to skip-jump technology and are pretty much capable of going wherever they want, the Surgeon Empire will sometimes utilize something known as an assault fleet. This is a rapid strike and rapid retreat fleet that can do significant amounts of damage, but aren't designed for sustained void engagement. They go in, they blitz the enemy, and then they immediately get out before any true defense or rally can occur. Now, the thing is that it's only the Surgeon Empire that uses this. It's not to say that the other factions wouldn't want to use something like this, but the Surgeon Empire, with the exception of the Florians, are the only ones that can really go wherever they want in a relatively short amount of time. Every other faction requires the use of interstellar highways, which we've talked about before. They're essentially stable wormholes that stay in fixed locations within reality that can very quickly transfer ships or whatever you send through them from one side of the universe to the other side, or from one solar system to another solar system. The problem with interstellar highways is that they're not super common, they cannot be created, and as far as the Siritan Empire can discover, they can't really be destroyed either. And they're very infrequent. It's not guaranteed that an interstellar highway will be within the limits of a solar system as well. In fact, it's very rare that they're within the limits of a solar system, largely because, as you can probably imagine, that would majorly mess up the orbital paths of the planets. That being said, they do sometimes occur within a solar system. For the most part, interstellar highways can be found in the depths of the void. Basically, this being the area between interstellar bodies, such as solar systems and galaxies and such. The void of space that largely doesn't really have a whole hell of a lot out there. And so as a result, for any faction that isn't the Siritan Empire, they can use these interstellar highways as a very quick way of going incredibly long distances, but it's not guaranteed that the next interstellar highway that you need to go to in order to get farther is going to be even remotely close to the one that you just came out of. So as a result, they're capable of going vast distances, but then they have to go very slowly within real space and slowly fly their way to the next one before they can actually jump a vast distance again. And the problem with this is that when you're slowly flying through the void of space, you are massively increasing the odds that you're going to come across a defense fleet, or you're going to come across a patrol fleet, or God forbid you come across a death fleet. At that point, you're stranded. It's either you fight with everything you've got in a desperate attempt to survive, or you're not making it out alive. And this is one of the reasons why other factions don't use assault fleets, because it's not logical to use them because they don't have skip jump technology. Intro, death fleets. Death fleets are exactly as they sound. These are your main battle fleets. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of ships in a single fleet that are solely dedicated to annihilating anything they come across, whether it means their destruction or not. And as a result, all other factions exclusively use death fleets, with the exception of their own territory. If they're within their own territory, they will largely use assault fleets, but it's not super common. And so, as a result, it's very rare for the other factions to actually attack one another. That's not to say there aren't wars going on. There's always wars going on. But it's very rare for void engagements to happen because to raise an assault fleet takes a relatively short amount of time. To raise a fully armed death fleet can easily take tens, if not hundreds of years. And as a result, it's one of those situations where if you're going to send out one of these death fleets, you have to be damn sure that you're going to get a major advantage, because chances are you're not going to see that death fleet again. Because like I said before, they go through these interstellar highways, but then they have insanely vast distances. We're talking tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of light years where they have to travel in real space, slowly trudging their way across the void just to reach another interstellar highway so that they can once again get that quick shortcut to wherever they're going. The problem is that every single faction is aware of just how dangerous these interstellar highways can be if they're not properly defended. Now, ones that are out in the void of space with nothing really around them, oftentimes there is a permanent blockade around the exit point. That way, anything comes out, they have to contend with a very, very angry fleet that is permanently posted there. However, if it's one of the ones that is on the edge of a solar system or even in a solar system, the Cyrodian Empire uses, once again, bastion worlds, as well as their own dedicated defense fleets. Now, it should be noted that the defense fleet for a bastion world is significantly more powerful than standard PDF. PDF standing for Planetary Defense Fleets. These are oftentimes whatever the planetary governor can get on their hands at the time. You know, they'll probably have a handful of frigates, they'll have a few destroyers, and if they're really lucky, they might have a cruiser or two. But they're certainly not going to have anything like a battleship, a battle cruiser, or even a carrier, let alone a grand cruiser. So as a result, they're oftentimes solely used for fending off pirates and aren't designed for major engagements because they're not going to survive. However, the defense fleet around a bastion world can easily take on a assault fleet on its own. Now, that being said, that's not very impressive, as there's not a lot of assault fleets coming into Cyrodian territory. However, with that out of the way, we can now go to the final one, these being fortress worlds. Fortress worlds are on a whole nother level compared to bastion worlds. Fortress worlds are literally, they eat, sleep, and breathe defense. You can essentially think of Cadia from Warhammer 40k. Fortress worlds, once again, much like bastion worlds, are designed in such a way to provide the most amount of benefit towards the defending force. However, fortress worlds take it to an extreme, largely because they have significantly more funding and supplies than something like a bastion world. That being said, fortress worlds are by far the rarest out of all defense-oriented planets and are typically only put in solar systems that are considered to be critical for the Cyrodian Empire. As a result, it's very rare that you're going to come across a fortress world. Now, there is something that I forgot to bring up, and that is this. Okay, so if a bastion world, and by association a fortress world, is an enormous threat, well, there's nothing saying that you have to fight it. You could just fly around it. Yeah, you could. You could just fly around the whole damn solar system to avoid the bastion world or fortress world. You could do that, but how many years, how many decades would that add to your travel? Because when you're doing in real space travel like this, one of your biggest advantages is a solar system's star, which allows you to do a slingshot maneuver, which is basically you get close to the star, close enough where its gravity is heavily affecting you, and then you loop around the star and quite literally slingshot yourself off into the distance at incredibly high speeds. But of course, if you need to do another slingshot, but you can't because there's a bastion or a fortress world there, that could add decades, maybe even centuries onto your travel time, simply because you can't do a slingshot maneuver because you can't get close to the star without having to go and fuck around with the Bastion or Fortress world. Needless to say, that's a pretty big issue, which is one of the reasons why the majority of other factions, they will just outright attack a Bastion world. They'll just outright attack a Fortress world, even if they know they're not going to survive the engagement if they decide to stay and fight. They'll fight just long enough to get as much of their fleet into position so that once again, they can do that slingshot maneuver and get the hell out of there. Now, how often does this actually work around a Bastion world? Semi-regularly. As I said, Bastion worlds aren't really designed to handle something like a Death Fleet. The odds of you doing the same thing with a Fortress world in system? Basically non-existent. Fortress worlds have significantly more surface-to-orbital cannons. Their defense fleet is significantly larger, capable of going toe-to-toe with rival death fleets. Furthermore, the city layout is far more, shall we say, meticulous, you know? They try to maximize the idea of utilizing a layout for defensive purposes as much as they possibly can, providing as many ambush locations for defending soldiers whilst not really giving a whole lot of advantages to the attackers. The tunnels under the city have been massively increased to the point where entire platoons of soldiers and even lightly armored war vehicles are capable of going pretty much anywhere in the city in relatively short amount of time and ambushing and flanking enemies from behind or from the sides, causing significant problems. The Siritan Empire tries to maximize these corridors as much as possible, basically long streets that don't really have a whole lot of intersecting blocks. That way, it kind of traps the enemy in a massive kill corridor that snipers can easily dispatch them in, even anti-armor snipers. Not only this, but oftentimes Fortress World cities actually have walls around them. And you can kind of think of walls similar to the 3 walls from Attack on Titan. The entirety of the city is divvied up into various different sectors. Each sector is completely surrounded by walls. Furthermore, within sectors, there are even areas in which temporary, much shorter walls can even be raised up from the ground to provide a way to prevent enemies from continuing or even just outright cutting off the enemy from their own allies, such as a particularly nasty and problematic tank decided to come through, and there's a bunch of soldiers behind it. Raise the wall. Suddenly, the tank that was receiving rifle support no longer has rifle support. That's a huge fucking problem for the tank. Not only this, but the walls themselves are oftentimes have many different... What's a good word for it? I was going to say ports, but that's not really. Basically, multiple chambers along the wall that are designed to hold heavy weaponry. We're talking about things like heavy auto cannons, artillery pieces, and significantly massive cannons of any make and model to rain down hellfire on the enemy. The tops of the walls are oftentimes thickly saturated in artillery pieces, mortars, and anti-air defense systems. Not only this, but it's not too uncommon to see fortress cities actually have shields that cover the entirety of the city, and these shields can even have the total size of the bubble adjusted so that if the outer wall is breached, the bubble can slowly be drawn into the next outer perimeter, the second wall after that, then the third wall, fourth wall, however many different layers the city has. They're specifically designed with defense in mind, and even if you're not in a city, you're not necessarily safe, as the Siritan Empire will oftentimes have air bases located across their entire fortress worlds to call in rapid airstrikes on any location. The Siritan Empire is much like Helldivers. They have absolutely no qualms about using orbital strikes, orbital bombardments, and airstrikes from aircraft, and they will use them in incredibly dense numbers. Now, of course, this all sounds incredibly impressive, However, we haven't even gotten to Austungrad yet, because there's another categorization beyond Fortress World, and this is the core Fortress World. Now, when we talked about the Siritan Empire as a whole, we had said that the very outer edge of the Siritan Empire's territory is known as the Rim Worlds. After that, you have Standard Worlds. Rim Worlds, recently conquered, don't really have a lot going for them. You know, it's kind of like, honestly, it's like RimWorld the game. I'll be honest. It's like RimWorld the game. It's a lot of small communities. There's no centralized government. There's not really a lot of law and legislation on there. There's probably not a significantly powerful army. After that, you have Standard Worlds, and that's basically where Earth is right now, minus multiple different factions. It's just a singular faction controlled by a planetary governor. But again, their tech is advanced, at least compared to what we in the real world have right now, but it's not really up to date. You know, it's better than what the Rim Worlds have, but not by a whole hell of a lot. After that, you have Glitter Worlds. Glitter Worlds are up to the standard of the Siritan Empire. This means that they have all the fancy new technology, all the fancy new weapons. They have their own private militaries, their own defense fleets, their own surface-to-orbital air cannons, whatever that may be. They're up to the now within the Siritan Empire. After this, you have what are known as the core worlds, and these are oftentimes the solar systems and planets within said solar systems that are around the centralized solar system. The centralized solar system being the solar system that has the crown world and the capital world, as well as the core fortress world. This being Austungrad. Now, what is Austungrad? Well, obviously, Austungrad is a fortress world. However, it's taken to an extreme even when compared to other fortress worlds. The term Austungrad itself is very roughly translated from High Cyrillic to English, the primary language of humanity, as the final bastion, which is definitely what happens every single time something gets near Austungrad, I'm not going to lie. It's usually the final planet that's left standing every single time a Siritan Empire has collapsed. That's how heavily fortified this place is. It's ridiculous. Now, it should be noted that, unlike with Earth, no matter what universe you go into, Earth is always Earth. It's always in the same spot, it's always in the same galaxy, it's always in the same solar system. Earth is Earth. However, the Siritan Empire doesn't have a homeworld. As we've discussed before, granted they're very far from their original roots, but Siritans were, a very long time ago, they were humans that were put into an experimental project known as the Cyrus Project to try and create magic through science. The project failed. The subjects, which were all volunteers, managed to flee after they were ordered to death, and they went and made an interstellar empire as a result. As a result, the Siritan Empire, or Siritans in general, they don't have a homeworld. They're not a species of evolution. In fact, the species known as Siritans have genetically and cybernetically modified themselves so extensively that evolution doesn't really play a part in the Siritan form. That's not to say that evolution doesn't occur within Siritans, but the fact of the matter is that when it does, oftentimes Siritans will outright just gene edit it out of their DNA, because they can. They've modified themselves into the perfect spacefaring species. As a result of this, Siritans are capable of breathing other atmospheres. Now, to be fair, this isn't a 100% efficient system. Siritans, by and large, breathe oxygen-rich in atmospheres, much like here on Earth. However, they can, for a specific amount of time, breathe other atmospheres, such as atmospheres that are rich in nitrogen, helium, or argon specifically. In these types of atmospheres, Ciritans are capable of breathing, but eventually they will have to go back to a pressurized room that is oxygen-rich, just like Earth's atmosphere. They can't stay in that type of environment forever without having oxygen-rich air. This is largely due to their gene-augmented lungs, as well as various other organs that exist within Ciritans that don't exist within humans. As a result, when the Ciritan Empire first forms, the solar system that they decide to settle down in, they'll choose whatever planet is, quote-unquote, the most defensible, whatever that means, and they're specifically looking at the way that the geography is formed, various different natural hazards, shall we say, such as oceans, lakes, rivers, stuff like that, that maybe isn't necessarily as easy to traverse, as well as the specific composition of the atmosphere. Because the planet has a high argon-rich atmosphere, that's obviously fairly toxic to every other faction, with the exception of Florians. So as a result, they require specialist equipment, such as air tanks and gas masks. Stuff like that can easily be damaged. At that point, they're contaminated. They're breathing in extremely hazardous gases into their bodies. They're going to end up suffering incredible health side effects because of this. Meanwhile, Ciritans, on an argon-rich atmosphere, are more or less pretty much fine. Every once in a while, every couple of hours, they have to go to an area that has oxygen-rich atmosphere, such as a pressurized room, but otherwise, they're kind of fine. They don't require gas masks at all. And as a result, they don't require specialist equipment that may or may not be easily damaged and compromising. So as a result, Austungrad is chosen as defensible as possible. Once again, the exact true definition of what that means, largely unknown. It's the Ciritan Empire being the Ciritan Empire. That's honestly the only explanation that we really need. Somebody had actually pointed out the fact that the ship categorizations are goofy as hell. I'm fully aware of this, especially after they told me. I just don't care. It's the Ciritan Empire. The thing we have to remember is that within humanity, yes, we understand what a cruiser is. You know, a cruiser is sort of like a light battleship sort of thing, if I'm remembering correctly. But that's because we're applying human logic to such a thing. The Ciritan Empire at this point is a completely separate species. So for them, a cruiser is something completely different to what we as humans consider a cruiser. That's my excuse for not researching things and just basically throwing together whatever the fuck I thought was cool at the time. But anyway, so as a result, this planet is chosen and is given the designation Austungrad. And Austungrad at that point becomes the primary defense-oriented planet for the Ciritan throne and capital world. Its sole job is to make sure that anybody that comes within this solar system that does not have explicit permission to be there will be shot out of the void before they can even loose a single round. And by and large, Austungrad does that pretty damn well. Due to the fact that it is the core fortress world, it by far receives the most funding and supplies out of any fortress world within the Ciritan Empire. The exact layout of the surface isn't that much different from a standard fortress world. That being said, the planet Austungrad always has a singular megacity. We've talked about megacities before. Megacities are cities that are the size of a continent. Think North America. This being all of Mexico, for the most part, all of the USA, and all of Canada. That's one city. All of that territory. That's one city. You can essentially compare them to Warhammer 40k hive cities. Like, if you nuke a megacity, it's going to do a lot of damage in that section of the city, But in the grand scheme of the city as a whole, that's not that much damage. That's really not that much damage. Now, the only true difference between the cities on a fortress world and the cities of Austungrad is that those underground tunnels have been further expanded. They have remote bombs in them for self-sabotage should it be necessary if the enemies get into the tunnels. Furthermore, these tunnels are absolutely gigantic, capable of mobilizing entire battalions of soldiers at any given time, moving them across the entire continent in a very short amount of time to any destination that they deem fit. Not only this, but allows for mobilization of major war vehicles. We're talking things like super heavy tanks and personnel carriers. They're capable of mounting major offensives wherever they want on the planet, and there's very little that the attackers can do about it. Furthermore, the walls themselves in Austungrad have been further fortified. It should be noted that the mega city on Austungrad is called Austungrad. Now, was the city named after the planet, or was the planet named after the city? Who knows? Anyway, the walls themselves have been majorly fortified. More nests within the walls have been created for heavier weapons to lay down firepower on any enemy that may be coming in. The walls themselves are practically impenetrable at this point, save for the gatehouses. However, that being said, the gatehouses are also, once again, heavily fortified, heavily defended, and even have their own self-sabotage systems known as void wave disruptors. These are very, very special bombs that work like black holes. It's essentially a detonation of null void without the null part. It's a big bubble of black energy that immediately consumes anything that enters into it and then just disappears, creating a perfect sphere inside. But the way that the walls have been constructed is that when these detonations occur, not only will it eviscerate and annihilate anything that's in the gatehouse itself, especially if it's the enemy, but it causes a controlled demolition of that section of the wall, collapsing the entire gatehouse in on itself, preventing access for the enemy. And this will oftentimes take an incredibly long amount of time for them to get through it, all the while hellfire is raining down from above. The tops of the walls themselves have heavy autocannons that are capable of pointing 90 degrees downward to rain down even more hellfire on the enemies. More artillery pieces, more mortars, more anti-air defenses. The shield itself around Austungrad isn't even a normal shield at this point, it's a null void shield. A specifically Austungrad class null void shield, which is somewhere between a mega carrier and the null void shields around Holy Sirita, which is that giant synthetic planet the Siritan Empire has made like 3 times. As a result, this protects the city from even things like orbital bombardment and orbital strikes to ensure that Allied positions aren't getting shot, again, from orbit. Aircraft are going to find almost absolutely no way to enter the city due to the sheer density of anti-air. Any incoming forces are constantly being shelled and bombarded by artillery and mortar that are located across every section of the wall. Furthermore, long-range, essentially sniper-esque cannons are picking off important vehicles and commanders at excessively long ranges. The city itself is practically unapproachable. Even if you get into the tunnels can be detonated remotely from the central command nexus within Austungrad itself to ensure that the enemy forces are not capable of using said tunnels. It is designed in every single way, shape, and form to be completely impenetrable. Even out in the streets, you aren't necessarily safe, as Austungrad also utilizes something known as pop-up turrets. These are special turrets that are embedded into the ground, seamlessly blending with the pavement directly above them. However, when they detect enemies, they raise up from the ground, quite literally popping up, and then unleash hellfire, whether these be machine gun-like turrets or flamethrowers or even long-range snipers and even mortars that are capable of coming up. Each and every single one of these turrets completely autonomous and capable of targeting and attacking enemies independently from the Nexus. However, the Nexus is also capable of controlling these pop-up turrets to use them more strategically. The enemy just passed, let's pop them up behind them and shell them in the back, making them, as you can imagine, incredibly dangerous. And even if you're out in the fields outside of the city itself, you're still not safe, as the Ceritan Empire, Austungrad itself, once again has multiple different air bases that will call in airstrikes non-stop, and they have no qualms about using things like napalm and stuff. As for the surface of Austungrad itself, it is thickly saturated in surface-to-orbital cannons. The defense fleet around Austungrad itself is about as powerful as a minor tendril of the Ceritan Empire's Holy Armada, the main death fleet, or I guess in this case, Death Armada of the Ceritan Empire. It is capable of holding off on its own multiple death fleets at any given time. The fleet around Austungrad easily numbering in the hundreds of thousands of vessels, if not millions. Furthermore, as if all of this wasn't crazy enough, the entire outer perimeter of the solar system that Austungrad and the Crown and Capital World exist within essentially have space versions of what are they called? Underwater mines. Sea mines? No, that's not it. Depth charges. That's what I'm thinking of. They have void versions of depth charges all the way around the entirety of the solar system. And the reasoning for this is, this sounds incredibly dangerous. What if you have vessels that are coming in that are allowed to be in the solar system? They're going to hit these void depth charges. Except, we need to remember that the Ceritan Empire has skip-jump technology, and they can skip-jump in-system without any relatively minor or major inconveniences to the overall orbital path of the planet, or the stability of the solar system itself. As if that wasn't stupid enough, having a literal sphere of void-based depth charges around the entire fucking solar system, Austungrad itself also possesses something known as the Archimedes assault platforms. These are 6 heavy-duty, basically weapon platforms that are located around Austungrad itself. There is one at each of the northern and southern poles, and 4 geo-locked around the equator. Now, what does geo-locked mean? As this isn't the proper term for this. Geo-locked basically means they choose a specific location on the surface of the planet, and the Archimedes platform will constantly stay directly above that location. The Ceritan Empire calls it geo-locking. I believe the actual term is... what was it? Geostationary orbit, I believe, is what it's called. I could be wrong about that. I don't remember the official term, but the Ceritan Empire calls it geo-orbit or geo-lock, or whatever I just said. But anyway, these platforms are absolutely ridiculous. Now, we've talked about in the past particle cannons. Particle cannons, aside from maybe antimatter weaponry, are by far one of the most powerful weapons within Shattered Legacies. However, they're almost never used simply because of their size constraints and their energy constraints. They require absolutely absurdly massive spaces in order for particle cannons to actually do any appreciable damage, and the amount of energy that these things take would easily put a singular Solstite reactor to shame. That being said, the Siritan Empire, in their infinite wisdom, decided to fuck around and find out. They decided that, okay, we want to use particle cannons on the Archimedes platforms. Previously, they couldn't do this, which they have now, but previously they couldn't do this because largely just multiple different levels of constraints. But they decided, okay, we want particle cannons on the Archimedes platform. How do we do that? Well, if we want them sufficiently powerful enough to do some serious damage to a Death Fleet at exceptionally stupidly long range, these things are probably going to have to be the size of Russia. You heard me right. They're probably going to have to be the size of Russia. Think about that for a second. A single weapon that can instantaneously destroy up to a battle cruiser in a single shot at such an insanely long distance away that the planet could be on the other side of the damn solar system and still snipe your ass. And it requires a device the size of Russia. Like I said, this gets ridiculous. Obviously, the orbital platforms themselves can't be the size of Russia for completely obvious reasons, I feel like. Because not only would that make a massive fucking target, but that would require so damn much logistics to keep this thing in orbit that it likely wouldn't stay in orbit. It would probably affect the gravitational fields of the planet itself, especially if you have 6 of these damn things. Never mind 1. The Siritan Empire had a brilliant idea, and that is to link these things from an unknown location to the platforms via a tether relay portal. This is the only instance in which the Siritan Empire does this. Now, we've talked about it when we talked about the war machines, what tether relay is, and the fact that war machines will utilize tether relay in their kinetic weapons. However, an important thing to know is that these tether relay portals aren't permanently open. The longer that these portals are open, the more energy they consume, up to a theoretical max, but they're not exactly certain about that. At least they weren't. So as a result, oftentimes, before war machines were actually deployed into combat, whilst they're still in their, essentially, repair cradle, the tether relay portal would be activated, and then the ammunition belt would be fed through, loaded into the weapon, and the war machine would go off on its merry way and go and do whatever a war machine does. And then whenever it required a reload or the energy drain was simply just too high, it would return to its repair cradle. The ammunition link would be unhooked, put back into the warehouse, and the portal would then be closed. It would then immediately be reopened. It would be rearmed, especially if they used enough ammo to drain the massive warehouses. And then it would go on its merry way again until either it ran out of ammo again or the drain from the tether relay portal became too much for the war machine to handle. And it would just they would constantly do this back and forth. And in fact, they still do this constant back and forth. The Siritan Empire decided, okay, so we have 6 of these platforms. Ideally, we want 4 of these particle cannons per platform, which you can do the math on that. So they need that many Russias, which is an astonishing amount of resources, needless to say. They need them at undisclosed locations, ideally not all in the same place, because that would be a huge problem if anybody found them. So we're going to scout them throughout the entirety of the Siritan Empire's territory, oftentimes put inside of planets themselves that they've cored out, because that's the thing a Siritan Empire can do, apparently. That way, you don't really notice it from orbit, therefore it's far less likely to get destroyed. And we're going to give it such absolutely, by Siritan Empire standards, stupid amount of power generation that theoretically the portal should stay open forever. And that's exactly what they did. And they discovered that there is actually a limit to how much energy it can drain. It turns out to keep one of these portals open, which the barrel of the particle cannon is like the size of the Empire State Building. Compared to the larger device itself, it's relatively small. That being said, it's still massive because we're talking about the Empire State Building here. But sorry, got completely derailed there. That being said, it's still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. They discovered that having a tether relay portal that size so that they could push the barrel through and then keep it open forever requires roughly 19 solstite reactors. 19. A single solstite reactor charging up its batteries to full capacity and then shutting it off would last humanity to the ends of time on a single charge, where we currently are in terms of power consumption on modern day Earth. It would literally last us to the ends of time itself, until Earth was eventually destroyed when the star goes supernova. That's how long and how much power a single solstite reactor produces. Now, for the Archimedes device, you have 19 just to keep the portal open. Never mind the power requirements for the particle cannon itself, which in of itself requires multiple Dyson spheres, because that was significantly easier than just having a shit ton of solstite reactors, which, if they ever went critical, oh my god, it would probably take out the galaxy it's in. Like, that would be cataclysmic. That would be like taking a nuclear weapon stockpile and detonating all the fucking nukes in it. That's how bad it would be. So they decided to do the smart thing and link these things with Dyson spheres located across the entirety of the Siritan Empire, producing more energy than what this thing needs. That way, if one of the Dyson spheres is found and destroyed, it can still be used. That being said, we're also talking about Austungrad here, which is probably the last fortress city you're ever going to see. So, a little bit of a problem there, but the Siritan Empire are constantly trying to figure out ways to get around that and bypass it, which they have a few ideas right now, but I'm not going to spoil that for you. So yeah, they have the Archimedes platforms, which has 4, each platform has 4 of these hypercharged particle cannons that can shoot at you from across the damn solar system with pinpoint accuracy and have so much power behind that singular particle that they can take out battle cruisers in a single shot. That's the Archimedes system. And that's what Austungrad has, defending it as its first line of defense. Technically, the Void depth charges are the second line of defense. If anything wants to get even remotely close to the Crown or Capital World, they have to go through so much firepower. Like, again, for my Warhammer 40k fans, the Archimedes platforms is essentially the Imperium of Man's Nova Cannon. You strapped 4 of those things to a platform in orbit, and that's just firing at the enemy. That's basically what these things are. I mean, they're significantly more powerful than a Nova cannon, but a Nova cannon is already absurdly powerful, so. But anyway, we've now covered what defense-oriented planets are, each of the 3 categorizations, as well as Austungrad itself, which means we have only one topic left, and this is the Emperors of Austungrad. The Emperors of Austungrad is a very special collection of individuals, and it may seem odd that they're called the Emperors of Austungrad, considering the Siritan Empire is controlled by an emperor. It may seem a little weird, but the official titles for each of these two positions is Siritan Emperor and Emperor of Austungrad. They do not stand on equal footing. In fact, the Emperors of Austungrad roughly have the same level of authority as the Siritan Commanders. Not the High Siritan Commander, but the standard ones, the 4 standard ones. This means that they have a significant amount of authority. They can tell major military forces what to do, if they have the clout to do it, which typically they don't. Who are the Emperors of Austungrad? Well, this actually goes to a new topic that we're going to have to do another deep dive on. Luckily, we don't have to do it before the Ruin War deep dive. There we go. And this is specifically Siritan nobility. Now, we've talked about Siritan nobility in passing before, specifically with Raymond. I don't think we did it in his deep dive, but Raymond holds a rank of nobility known as Von, which is oftentimes utilized as a middle name. As a result, Raymond was Raymond von Ulcia. Von is the second lowest mid-ranking title of nobility. There's obviously low-ranking, mid-ranking, and high-ranking noble titles. The special thing about Von is that it is the highest noble rank that you can purchase. Low-ranking noble titles, as well as the 2 lowest mid-ranking titles, you can outright purchase from the Siritan Empire. Now, are much higher noble ranks going to be particularly impressed with you? Probably not. I mean, you have a lot of money, which is saying something, but you didn't really do anything to truly, quote-unquote, deserve the title. After that, we have the highest mid-rank title, known as Kier. And finally, the highest noble rank possible, which is Dalavir. Now, Dalavir is insanely difficult to get. This is like your literal legends of the Siritan Empire. We're not talking about the legendary Jackson, but literal legendary individuals within the Siritan Empire. We're talking about Captain James Beckett. We're talking about Supreme Commander Marcus Bane. You know, individuals who, granted, we haven't done a deep dive on, but are known in every single corner of the Siritan Empire. There is almost nobody in the Siritan Empire that doesn't know those 2 names because of how legendary those 2 individuals were. James Beckett and Marcus Bane. These 2 guys were as close to God tier as you can get. And as a result, you have to be somebody of equal importance to gain the rank of Dalavir. Now, Dalavir comes with its own unique perks. You see, with Siritan nobility, the noble title is only given to the individual who is actually given the title. So this means that if your father is the person who got the noble title of Kier, the highest mid-ranking title, only your father has that title. Furthermore, the title cannot be passed down to the heirs of the family. Once your father dies, your family no longer has access to noble status. Now, in the grand scheme of things, does this really mean a whole hell of a lot? No. It provides some benefits. The next of kin of the person who gains the title gain advantages and boons relatively on the same level, but again, it can't be passed down. And this is to ensure that the Siritan Empire always has very strict control over who is an actual noble within the Siritan Empire, ensuring that these are individuals who have sacrificed something for the wider Siritan Empire, and this is their reward. However, Dalavir rank is completely different. Dalavir can be passed down to other people, whether that be your partner, your parents, or your children. However, the requirements are also very specific, as if you end up dying, it doesn't automatically transfer ownership. If you haven't already said you are going to transfer ownership to this individual, the rank becomes null. Your family no longer has the Dalavir rank. Now, how do you pass it down? Well, you have to go to a very, very, very specific building on the Siritan capital world. You have to go to that capital world, go to that very specific building with the individual you want to pass the title down to should you end up dying, and you have to go through an insanely lengthy process to say, yes, I would like to pass down my title to this individual. And even then, usually the title can only be passed down when you die. If there is even the slightest whiff of foul play involved in your death, in any way, shape, or form, if they even smell like the faintest traces of foul play, the noble rank is voided immediately. If there is any chance that foul play could have occurred, and that the person who you are passing it down to may have in some way, shape, or form directly or indirectly killed you, the noble ranking is void, and the family is permanently prevented from regaining the rank no matter what they do, no matter what they sacrifice for the Siritan Empire. But of course, why is Dalavir rank so incredibly important? Well, Dalavir rank is... People who have Dalavir rank are given biological immortality. This is something the Siritan Empire can do. They don't do it often, though. It is reserved for the few as essentially like the ultimate reward. You can still die. You can still very much die. But you won't age. You aren't affected by diseases, poisons, or plagues. And you kind of just live. And as a result, a lot of times, individuals who hold the rank of Dalavir rank are the individual that it was originally given to. However, there are other boons to Dalavir. When it comes to the 3 highest ranks of nobility, they're capable of housing their own private army, shall we say. And depending on the exact rank, I don't have the 2nd and 3rd highest ranks, but depending on the rank will depend on how big of an army you can have. When you get to Dalavir rank, however, you can have your own personal war machines within your own army. This army also includes aircraft, it includes vehicles of war. When you get to Dalavir rank, it includes war machines and even your own private fleet that you can deploy at any time, with the expectation that you're essentially an unofficial Siritan commander. You will use the forces that you have at your disposal should it ever be required to assist the Siritan Empire without a moment's hesitation. However, it should be noted that Dalavir, they only own the war machine itself. They do not employ the crew on board. The crew on board of the war machine that they own is strictly controlled by the wider Siritan Empire to ensure that you essentially can't have a Horus Heresy type of situation. Now, the Emperors of Austungrad are specifically families that hold the rank of Dalavir. It's not all of them, but it is a significant amount of them. They have been commonly called the Emperors of Austungrad, largely due to the fact that they have some major military forces at their disposal that they will use to protect the central solar system. And the nice thing about this is that it's completely separate from the military. The Supreme Commander may have the final say about what happens within the Siritan military, but there's still politics. There's still bureaucracy that they have to go through in order to mobilize forces. It's still a slow process, whereas a Dalavir family, the head of the household can literally just say, hey, you see that fleet coming? Go fuck it up. And they just go. They do not require permission. They don't have to jump through all of the hoops of the Siritan military. Like, unless the planet is actively being attacked, then yeah, they don't have to jump through all those hoops. But if they see a fleet coming and they have plenty of time, the Saracen Empire will very slowly grind its way through. Do we really need to attack this? Yes, you need to attack this. What the fuck are you on about? It's going to attack us. But that's largely how the Saracen Empire works. Now, there is one final thing that I want to talk about, and that is a very specific Dalavir noble. Nobody knows who he is. Honestly, he kind of deserves his own deep dive. The only thing that anybody knows is his title, which is the White Mask. Nobody's entirely certain who this individual is, largely due to the fact that their identity is always concealed. Even after following the person home to their, essentially what can best be described as a castle on Austungrad, there's not really any information on who they are. There's nobody who owns the house other than simply the moniker, the White Mask. Furthermore, he is the only known Dalavir noble who every single asset within his military, including the crew of Saracen war machines, is completely and solely owned and employed by the White Mask. No other Dalavir noble family has this honor. No other one can claim to have anywhere near this same level of authority. But of course, as per usual, the White Mask really does require his own deep dive because there's a lot of mystery and unanswered questions surrounding this individual, especially when it comes to noble politics and the sheer things that he somehow gets away with. So, without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode on what Austungrad is and the sheer absolute monster that is the defense system of Austungrad. I hope you guys are looking forward to the most likely new series coming out Wednesday and Friday. I still have to do some final things on there, so for sure there'll be a video on Friday. Wednesday, not sure about. I'm going to try and get it out in time. And then obviously we have our Saturday and Sunday live streams at noon Central Standard Time. Saturday we're doing RimWorld. Sunday we're doing Sunday Night Live, which is probably going to be our Minecraft series Modded Survival Season 2, simply because YouTube still doesn't want me uploading it for whatever reason. I don't know why. So yeah, without further ado, see you guys.